Welcome to Beyond the Steps. We are so happy to have you here today with us. I am Melissa McDaniel Grisham, along with my beautiful co-host, Bree Zabrowski, and we have Aysha Upchurch here today to talk about building a hip hop dance program, why it's important to build a program and not just offer classes. We are all, seems like we are in constant mode of figuring out what are we doing next year? What are we doing next time? There's really no next season development time of the year. So whenever you're watching this, we hope that this is a timely topic for you in understanding why it is so very important that we have a comprehensive hip hop dance program for our students versus just offering one-off classes. This episode is available on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook. Please share, 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 share. This is important information for everyone. And without further ado, I would love for Bree to talk about
Yeah.
Aysha.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond the Steps. We have Aysha Upchurch back with us today. This is the third episode in her series with us. So we've been so excited to be able to chat with her a little bit more this season. But Aysha, the dancing diplomat, is an award-winning artist, passionate educator, and sought-after consultant who creates and facilitates and designs for radical change. She holds an MA in International Peace and Conflict Resolution from American University and an EDM from Harvard University. Aysha is a lecturer on education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she has pioneered courses and initiatives to elevate hip hop and the movement as necessary tools of transformative education. She is the founder Director X, a lab project that explores the power of hip hop and education through intergenerational programming. As a dancer choreographer, Aysha continues and considers herself to be a storyteller who leans on African diasporic movement to create stories of joy, connection, and liberation on stage that seek to stir up that which is stagnant in order to bring performers and audiences closer in dialogue with each other and themselves, enduring endeavoring never to separate her identity as an artist and educator. Her work on the stage and in the classroom braids together social justice and youth advocacy and provides the foundation for her media and merchandise project, Dope, Dismantling Oppression and Pushing Education. Aysha, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Always a pleasure to be here. Good morning, afternoon, whatever time it is.
Whatever it is, wherever you are.
Whatever. Good
Whatever you
day.
show.
Yeah, like one of the first conversations we ever had with you on the show years ago was talking about, what we're doing with hip hop in our studios. I know we're going to dive into a lot of this today, but why do you think there's such a pressure for studios to start building curriculum versus those independent classes, or do you?
Well, I think one that well, first I want to say this year, 2023, the whole world is like pausing or taking time to commemorate like 50 years of hip hop. And we know that the culture is like older than that, but there's kind of an agreed upon date, August 11th, 1973, where this historic party took place. And so here we are, 50 years of what was thought to be a passing trend, that some kids were just making music, making noise, moving their bodies, and here we are. And so that dance classes have developed and really spread from the US to across the globe in the past few decades, with folks wanting to learn more about this dance style. I think it's appropriate to think about curriculum versus one-off classes, because in fact, you're putting yourself in a position to be responsible for transmitting nuggets of the culture. And so I think if folks can open themselves up to thinking about why it would be better to approach developing classes that represent the culture and the evolution of a form that is still evolving, that gives you, I think, a bit more space to design responsibly and responsively to an art form that can't actually just be represented in one-off classes. So I think in community dance studio land, which is where I started my practice of teaching 20 years ago, I wasn't using the word curriculum. But I think anyone who is an educator and you show up consistently and you have students who come back if you think about where you start, what you want people to get, where you hope that they will go, that is curriculum. And I think,
Mhm.
maybe if folks listening, and I even work with graduate students who are like, I've never developed a curriculum. I'm like, yeah, but you've come up with a whole podcast,
Right.
developing the content, what you hope the impact will be, who the audience is. I think if we can demystify and kind of take some of the academic power away from the word curriculum and realize how essential it is to all that we do as dance educators. And it also is why you think about it as a program versus just, oh, I just do this thing in class once a week.
Mhm.
I love that you said that though, because there is that like unspoken connotation. It's kind of intimidating and scary to hear the word curriculum. It feels like a heavier weight,
Yeah.
right? But it's the same thing that many of us, not all of us, but so many of us do. You're planning education with a long-term vision in mind. You're starting here, you're ending here, and how are we going to break this up to elevate and step up every single year that they come in the studio, right? So that's a great point, and it's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, I think that you fell right in my lap there with my
Yeah.
next line of questioning. Curriculum is big and scary to people. A whole curriculum. They think,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. This is what we're gonna get. You have testing and modules and assessments and where you're like those things have been applied to curriculums, but they don't necessarily like everyday life is a curriculum. You wake up in the morning and you learn from time to time to time to time and experience to experience, and the next day you apply that, and then by the time you get to hopefully where you're nice and seasoned, you've learned enough to be able to pass something along. So then you have a curriculum that actually moves from person to person. Look how that works. That's day-to-day life. Do you think that when people are pulling classes together, how do you think that they should figure out? I guess they got to figure out what the end goal is. How do you figure out what your end goal is for a hip hop program or a hip hop curriculum so that you can then build the? I'm not going to use the word curriculum. I'm going to say program collection of courses that are
Yeah.
connected. Well, how do you figure out? Okay, I want these students to end up here when we don't necessarily have a model for that. Like we know where we want our ballet students to end up. We want them to end up knowing how to do boom, 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 boom. We know where we want our tap students to end up. We want them to end up knowing boom, boom, boom. But we don't have that model for hip hop. So how do
Right.
we figure out what the end point is?
Well, okay, so and I'm just gonna, we keep it real here. My oven timer is very musical, so folks hear anything in the background,
We
the
love
food is
additional
done.
sound.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it just
just
adds to
you're
the
welcome.
ambiance.
Like talking about the day to day. So one, again, I think when I consider program development, curriculum building, lesson planning, uh, event management, all of these really big words that I think traditionally a lot of folks, we've attributed that to, oh, that happens in the corporate sector, or that happens in academia, or that happens in school buildings. And then we take the model that they use and go, and that's what it should look like. When in
Mm-hmm.
fact, many of the ways that those things are developed and done are just one, they're generally applicable. And on the other side of that coin, sometimes the way that they've been done and standardized has never been interrogated to go, what can we do better? Because the
Mm-hmm.
world has evolved. The more we know more about how people learn, we know more about different ways to teach. We know more about how to develop more inclusive curriculum, or even HR manuals, right? So across the board, I think there's room for inspection of what we've normalized as the standard. And so folks know how to design towards an end goal, right? You have a dinner party at 7. You can't, that's why my oven's going off. You can't wait to prep until 5 p.m. So I'm not
Right.
saying what's the curriculum lesson plan of your dinner party, but we actually know from our day-to-day life how to go, this has to happen, this for that to happen then. And I know some variables are going to come up, but what can I try to anticipate? And also, what do I know how to do, right? So again, going with this dinner party kind of motif, if I know I'm not the dessert baker, then I've got to make time to either one, go get some pre-made things or ask some folks if they could bring the dessert and ask them, do you need to heat it up in my oven, and make those types of accommodations into the planning. So all of that to say, I want to take away the weightiness of those big terms to go, developing a dance program is not so different from the things that we do in our daily lives, in our personal lives, in our professional lives, where we know there's a deadline, there's a target date. And so we start backwards mapping to that. And also, I think as dance educators, like I don't lesson plan for something for an end goal that I know that I can't get people to, either with my own skill set or if I'm not being intentional around designing collaboration into that, right? And so I think when I developed a dance program on hip hop fundamentals for a dance studio years ago, I knew that I was like not the top person in any of those styles. I was like, I know that I'm good enough to give people an intro set and to give them resources. And I'm not going to say we're going to cover all of locking. That's not my identity. We're not going to cover all of popping. That's not my identity. But I was like, I want by the end for people to know the historical foundations of it. I want them to have resources to go for further study. And I want them to know that they can take these foundations and go into the next level class where they can continue to develop that. And so being honest about where your skill set is, but also thinking, what do I have to build for that end goal? And I'm going to go quickly turn off my oven.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. And if you're just joining us, this is Beyond the Steps. This is a show where we talk about one question every week related to a range of topics, from gender inequity, sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, dance, medicine and science, racism, you name it, we talk about it and how it's affecting our young performance athletes. Today, we're chatting with Aysha Upchurch, and she is back with us doing a 3-part guest series. This is part 3. We're talking today about how, the difference in building a curriculum or a program at a dance studio or a studio environment with youth performing athletes or just individual classes. So Aysha, I want to make sure, because we talked about this before too. I love that you're saying build this out within your own limitations, right? So, but we also want to make sure that whatever we're doing thoroughly, and we're putting the dot on that I, we're crossing the T, that wherever we land with that it is thorough, and that we're doing it in the most accurate way possible. Correct?
Absolutely. And again, I think in our earlier conversations, or the through line would be, constantly being honest.
Yeah.
Honesty. Like
the
most, I think, efficient, the most essential way, I believe, to cross a T and to dot an I is to be honest. Like, does our school have the capacity to take people beyond level 1? No, we don't. So then we are going to design to the gods level 1 development.
Right.
And then on the other side of that, the behind the scenes side of that, we're going to learn and figure out what do we do to develop our training, our educators to get to level 2, or how do we recruit some people to join our faculty to handle the students who are going to level 2. I think sometimes we think about, young people progressing at the end of a studio year, which in a lot of ways mirrors the academic year. And it doesn't work the same way as academic year. Like, we assume you're going to go to level 2. You might not go to level 2. And a lot of your friends might go to level 2. But have we thought about what we can do for students so that they're able to assess themselves, but also if we have faculty to send them to? Just because I am really good at level 1, it does not mean that I might also be suited for level 2 teaching. And so this requires studios to be thinking about, when you're building out a program or the curriculum, is to also be honest around, who do we have to teach? And if our studio does not have some type of mutually beneficial relationship with another studio or program where we can kind of pipeline students to, then we really have to figure that out, but be very clear that we're offering fundamentals. And I think what's difficult for studios in this realm for hip hop dance, street dance styles, is that it's so freaking popular. It's so freaking appealing. It's so freaking commercially available for us all to like fan out on. And, oh, I want that. I want that. I want that. And it can bring in money. And so there's that tension of like, you can bring in more dollars by having more classes, but you might not be building the most integrous program if you don't have the faculty to match the true skill development.
So that is the question. So would it be fair to say that we shouldn't be looking at building out a program if we don't have the infrastructure to accommodate that program? We need to build the infrastructure first and then set the program. So what is that? If you're a studio director and you're like, I want to, I want to build out our hip hop program, and I want to, you ask yourself those questions. What is my goal and how do I want to present this? But then you look at your staff and you look at your own capabilities and go, I don't know enough to do this.
Right.
Do you start or do you wait?
So I think this might have me clarify like my initial thesis of like program versus one-off classes. Like instead of maybe setting them up as like these dichotomous poles on either line of the spectrum, is to think about how they may be concentrically or in some type of overlapping circle or in a continuum look like. So if you don't have, I would say if as a studio that was not, and let me be even more clear, if you are a dance studio and your primary and historical classes that you offered were more of, let's say, the quote unquote traditional, you had jazz, which is a whole other space for interrogation, but you had ballet, you had modern, you had some tap, and that's been your bread and butter. And you've developed teachers and students who kind of cycle through that. It keeps your dollars popping. And then you said, oh, hip hop. You have to be honest. We did not design this school for a hip hop program. So at capacity right now, what we have the availability to do is offer hip hop classes and ask yourselves, can we do that on the front side? Label them correctly if they're all level 1 intro, or if they're choreography and not technique, like say that. And then on the back side, what are you all doing to develop program building blocks? Recruiting teachers so that you can have that same pathway that you've developed for the other dance genres at your studio. Now, the folks that I know who have opened and are running successful hip hop dance based studios, they designed a program in mind. So there's room for young people to train and to go to the next level. There's room for adults who are like new or seasoned, and there's the different facets of hip hop dance culture represented. They offer spaces to session, they have jam sessions, they offer battles, ciphers, the whole nine, because they are hip hop dance studios. So very important that we hear the difference. If you are not a hip hop dance community rooted studio, but you are a general dance studio who's now incorporating hip hop dance into your curricular offerings, you have to go, we might be able to start off with classes. Do not tell people in the world that you too have a hip hop dance program. No, you have classes, and that's okay. If you're also developing a pathway to create a program.
Yeah, I love that distinction. I think that's really important for people to hear, because I think sometimes it can feel like it's all or nothing. And sometimes it can feel very muddy as far as how those things work together. So I think that was really important. So thank you for that. We're using the term building when we're talking about this topic because it's a process, right? So can you talk a little bit about the time it takes to build? Because I think sometimes people have this vision that, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to build this and it's going to be an instant success, right? What
right.
do you agree that awesome. It takes right? And what is a reasonable expectation in terms of how long it takes to really truly develop something like that?
Yeah, so I want to be careful that I can't say what's reasonable in a prescriptive manner, because again, I don't know if folks are thinking about, context is important. If there are other thriving dance studios in the area who've already built successful hip hop dance programs, you got to ask yourself, what does it mean for us to be developing one? I was just having this conversation with a colleague who's very experienced in participating in and really partnering with different hip hop programs across the globe. And in the U.S., we have like a really we have a, not to say it's not in other places, but in the U.S., let's just call a duck a duck. We're territorial and we are non-collaborative. It's kind of in the
Well, especially in the dance
fabric of
space.
this
Yeah.
nation.
Yeah.
So people don't think about, oh, that studio's held this down. They have a community that they're very specific of reaching. We don't think about, oh, let me not do that right here. Let me find what the other need gap is and be complementary. We have a very like problematic, competitive spirit from our personal that I think translates into the professional realm. And so I say all of that because to develop something reasonably and to understand what type of time it takes, I'm sorry, not sorry, there is no really quick and easy way to say that. If you've got to, I think the term building at scale is also a phrase that makes so much sense, but we lie about what scale is. Scale does not mean how like sheer volume of people in classes.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a 3-room studio, your scale should look vastly different than a single room studio and how they define success. And also, if you've never, because hip hop is not just a dance form, it is a culture. And it's not to say that I don't believe like ballet or modern dance have are influenced by very real cultural dynamics, but there is no ballet culture that swept over the world.
Mm-mm.
That has influenced how people walk, how people talk, how people speak, how people dress, how people read the world, and read each other. Hip hop is a culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're the reason why I say there's no prescriptive answer here is because if you're building something that is one part of a larger culture, if you do not have people who are from and been tending to that culture who are building this with you, your timeline's going to look different than folks who are doing that with people who have like been seeped into the culture. So I think folks have to be honest. And I really believe honesty needs to become sexy again.
Mm. Yeah.
Put that
So
on the-
however long it takes for you to be honest, that's how long it'll take for you to build a program and to build in time for reflection.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think community studios look beyond the metric of how many tickets we sold at the recital, and how many students we have in classes. There's a deeper line of reflection of our faculty are, because if you also have teachers who are still performing artists, touring artists,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to impact how you develop
Sure.
your
Right.
roster.
Right.
Sure.
Exactly.
So I think if there's like deeper reflection time to look at the different metrics that are a bit more particular to hip hop culture and hip hop dance artists,
Mm-hmm.
that's also going to inform at what speed building this looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I want to add too, I think just building, a competitive program myself, like I can say it takes every year you're not just looking at the numbers and who came through your door. You're looking at what did we do well, what do we need to do better, what kinds of things do we need to change to be more effective to reach our goals. I mean, it took years to lay that foundation, to get your faculty on board, to create that team environment where you're all working towards the same goal. And again, to follow Aysha's line of, we can't give you what that timeline is. It's going to be different for everybody. I definitely, in my experience, it has taken a very long time, and consistently being committed to evolving and changing and growing and having those honest conversations with yourself, with your team. It is not getting the parents on which is like a whole nother thing. There's so many things to consider, and honesty is absolutely at the heart of all of it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I
And
just had
sorry, really quickly. I know for me, I say it takes me 3 years to figure out a class I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they
I
say
would
it takes
agree.
10,000 hours of practice to
Sure.
like develop mastery at something. So input that into whatever quadratic equation, and what you end up with is it's gonna take a while.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
it's not going to look the same. I mean, that's in
Mhm.
any business, any project, anything. What you start out with is not what you end up with, and that's how it should be. You know, if it's a very different look in year 3 than it was in year 1, you're doing something right. So
Mhm. Yeah.
keep that in mind too, and don't get so married and committed to that one ideal that you had on day 1.
Mhm. While you were talking, Aisha, I had this a thought that I had to write down because age. But um, we talk when you were talking about, okay, you got to be honest about what you don't know. You got to be honest about what you do know and what you can do. But I find that in this space, and when we're talking about hip hop, when we're talking about African diasporic culture, and we're talking about all the culture, people don't know what they don't know. And unfortunately, you have to be humble enough and curious enough to figure out what you don't know. And in turn, people are not humble or curious enough because of the implicit bias that comes with the hip hop culture. It's like if you're sitting in a space of privilege as a studio owner, you're like, well, yeah, I know about hip hop. I've seen some rap videos. Like it's like, well, no, you have to actually take the time to learn about the culture, or at least have some familiarity with the culture before
Would be
you can
nice.
know, well, I don't even know what I know to be able to develop level 1. Like I have no clue. How do you, especially understanding that many dance studios are not in areas that have lots of exposure or representation from hip hop culture, a lot of rural areas sometimes, you find a lot of dance studios, especially smaller ones, who might not have a hip hop dance program. How do you encourage people to understand that you have to become familiar with the culture before you can actually even do this, to know what you don't even know?
Yeah, well, listen, people, I think humans are the most incredible species, and sometimes we're the most trash species because of our ego.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have one. Whether you got a big ego, it's like that's just part of our actual, the id, the ego, the super id, but we just have one. And I think it just gets amplified in like the business world, because dance studios are still businesses. They
Mm-hmm.
have to do, like no business wants to be like, well, that's just living in the red. Like no
Mm-hmm.
wants to do that. So I just want to offer, like, I completely understand like that we were saying all of this in the actual real world and not just like a rose-colored glasses one. And so folks are not, because it is not sexy to say I don't know, because collaboration has become confused with competition. Then people have become disempowered to be honest and say, hey, I think I'm offering just one slice of this pie, okay? Because under the hip hop umbrella of things, um, it, if you focused on choreo, I'm gonna say cool. If you're focused on like literally the different forms and styles of hip hop, cool. It doesn't cost actually anything to be that honest and say we are like, our hip hop program focuses on uh, choreography and preparing students for like competitions in the commercial industry. Maybe that's not sexy to say in your byline or in your mission statement or your about us page, but that's okay. And for folks who are in places that have less access to, it's getting increasingly more difficult for me to like believe there are people who, it's more mythical that you don't have access now than not.
Right.
Gracias, I
Right.
interwebs. Get up in them DMs. Like
Right.
sometimes just sending people a message. You know, I have a friend now who's like in rural Indiana doing master classes.
Right. Right.
Right.
So like
That
I just
master class thing is an option. You can, and I remember
right.
you saying years ago, if you don't have, reach out to your network, get rid of a and bring in people for masterclass, whatever we want to call it. I know that term is debated,
Right.
and it's a hot button topic, but bringing people in from the outside to educate your students, that shows your commitment. And I remember what you said. We've learned so much from you over the years. It really has stuck with me in many ways. But I remember a couple of years ago you said, and if all else fails, like if you can't or won't do those things, right, then just don't call it hip hop. Call it something else. Call it what it is.
listen. I
You
think
know?
that, and that's the part is like, and there was some big. I've witnessed it personally. Big to do about a particular class that was called this name that was I felt confusing. And then myself experiencing the class, I did not think that it was representative. It was not right. And I'm like not trying to be a gatekeeper, but in some
Right.
ways I am like a knowledge or a tradition bearer, a culture
Mhm.
bearer. And I just felt like it's not representing the culture because nowhere in this teacher's instruction was there reference to hip hop. It was just really transacting on a name. The class is still going. They've come up with a new name with it. There was a lot of hubbub, but the teacher's okay. The class is still running, and I think that type of the discomfort actually isn't the entire journey. It's just a necessary,
Part. Yeah.
maintenance check that we all go through. And so I hope that folks are not feeling I hope that folks don't let like self-judgment and shame and guilt like have the complete like steering wheel or the driver's seat. Discomfort is part of the journey when you're trying to build something that can last.
Mhm.
And nobody's killing it 100% of the time ever. We're always going to be working and improving, like you were saying, Bree, like it's going to continue to evolve and look different year to year. Also, the world has changed,
Yeah.
um, people fly more or people are online more learning. Programs like this, other virtual platforms, modules, are allowing folks to get access to knowledge where geography has been a challenge before. And it still might mean that I don't have a body in my space who can do that type of teaching. But I think that's at least making the pathway to developing classes and then hopefully maybe programs is getting shorter.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
So
If
true.
you're just now joining us, this is Beyond the Steps. I'm Melissa McDaniel Grisham with Turning Point Dance Creations with my co-host Bree Zabrowski from Apollo Performance, and we are talking to Aysha Upchurch about programs. Why it is so very important to build a hip hop dance program versus offering just classes. We've had a great discussion. If you're not catching this from the beginning, you can go back and watch the entire thing on YouTube at Apollo Performance or at TP Dance Creations from the beginning. And you can binge a whole bunch of other stuff that's there as well. All of our other shows with Aysha, which I've lost count. We might be in show number 7, 8, somewhere. She is definitely one of our faves. So please go back and watch all those after you watch this one and share this with your friends, family, colleagues, students, parents, everybody. This is important information. I want to kind of dive into something that, I mean, some people will find it to be controversial, or not controversial, but an uncomfortable, like you said, this uncomfortable moment in the journey. Um, Placing an emphasis on building a program versus offering classes and its connection to actual equity and racial justice in your studio, and creating an environment that does pay homage to pioneers that did not necessarily look like you or look like your audience. But how do you think that, is there a connection there? One, I'm assuming you think that. I think that, but I'm assuming you think that. So I don't want to assume. But is there a connection to making this intentional effort to do that and also creating an environment that focuses on equity and racial justice?
Well, I mean, I think everything uh, in some way is going to be tied to equity and racial justice in this country because this country was designed inequitably and racistly, not as a
Mhm.
point of controversy or speculation. That's just actual fact. It was designed sexist, it was designed ableist, it was designed very classist. And so, therefore, anyone who's endeavoring whether you are building in school settings, community settings, anything you're building. And I think in this day of age where people's consciousness is, I don't want to say have gotten turned on, but definitely agitated, it would be difficult not to see that there is some connection in program, courses, and how that's impacting what people are feeling about humanity, their own representation, their own feeling of agency. And so the general response to your question is like, yes, there's a connection. Where I want to just offer maybe a little bit of a wrinkle in the discussion is just to be speaking plainly, like hip hop definitely is in its roots, like its DNA is Black cultural production. That does not mean that there were not folks who are non-Black helping their building, participating in, archiving, documenting, becoming the knowledge bearers of the culture. Um, because so much whitewashing happens in general with a cultural production that is not European, white, Western, heteropatriarchal, then there is then I think sometimes a knee jerk that goes too far the other way, where we're like, oh, if you ain't Black, you ain't got nothing to do with hip hop. Like, and it is so not that simple, folks. It is so not that simple. I do want to say, and then the added like wrinkle to that is, I don't want people to go like, well, since we don't got no people that look like the folks who were the originators, it's okay for us to just have um, any old body who's from whatever race or whatever ethnicity or whatever gender teaching their approximation of this. Okay, so if you haven't been training, you probably shouldn't be teaching. Because I think that drives the wedge further in like inequitable representation of who's participating in and preserving and advocating for hip hop culture, because it just becomes another whitewashed story. And so and then it also implicitly supports like racist representation of whose dance matters and whose dancing bodies matter. And so I just want to be able to like complicate with love and grace that there are folks who are white, there are folks who are Black, there are folks who are Latinx, there are folks who identify as Asian or Asian American, who have been holding down this culture, who are respected, revered, doing beautiful work. And there are folks who are Black, there are folks who are white, there are folks who are Latinx, there are folks who are Asian, Asian American, all the way down the line, who have not really been showing up to take care, but think that they can transact on their proximity, or like, oh, I'm Black, you know, I popped and locked in my living room once, so boom, all hip hop is mine, and now I'm the gatekeeper. And if you're not, so I think we need to be able to have that nuanced conversation, and I appreciate that question. And I think particularly in community spaces, that's again why I think when you're building a hip hop program, if you're not paying attention to the culture, you'll try to make this literally racially Black and or white. But if you are participating in, have been somebody taking care of the culture, and you are in those community spaces where hip hop really actually lives, thrives, and generates and procreates, you'll see how many people are in those spaces where they come from. You'll get to understand a little bit more about the nuance of where they've been in the development and of the documenting of this culture. And it's going to make you pause for a second on like, if you ain't Black, you whack.
Right.
Because just because I'm Black does not mean that I am inherently suited to be teaching breaking. I'm not a breaker.
Yeah.
I'm not. If you have somebody who's a breaker and they are white and they're a woman, or they are brown and they're a person with a disability, but they have studied and seeped themselves into the culture and can actually teach this stuff, that's who should be teaching.
Right.
Not sure if that completely went off the board with your question, but
oh no, it's right on.
So do you think that having a clear well thought out, connected class that's offering hip hop and sends a positive message to your studio and your families about I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. Does having a well done class, no matter who you are, where you're offering it, does that promote to unity and to the families in your community, if it's well done, that this culture and supporting this culture is important to your studio? Because I think when we're studio directors and owners and we're talking about revenue and we're worried so much about that, we forget the importance. Sometimes equally important is the studio culture. That's the face that everybody sees, right? That's how we're representing ourselves. So would you say that having, a well thought out, well done class that is, you've put a lot of effort and energy into building and doing it right, even if you don't look like the people that started the culture, that says something to the community about your studio as much as revenue and attendance and everything else?
Well, I mean, this goes back to like, what are you all defining as metrics for success?
Right. Right.
And how are you placing revenue into that conversation? It should not be the sole one. If it is a value for you, for your students to know the historical context of all the forms that you are offering,
Mhm.
and if you have articulated how and why that impacts the studio culture, which by extension will impact how the families feel when they're in the space and how they feel about representing where their children are going and taking classes, then yes. If you have not valued what teaching, what quality teaching means for studio culture, then you'll miss it. And so I don't
Mhm.
want to give a blanket yes or no. I want to say, like, if you've articulated the value system,
Right.
I do want to give people an agitational push to go, why doesn't your community dance studio's value system have to be incorporating students being well-rounded learners of the cultures that inform the forms? If
Mhm.
you have not been doing that for all of the forms, I'm here. I love hip hop, and I know it has not been done well enough for hip hop in these general dance studios. Then I go, I don't know why. Again, I said this in an earlier recording. I don't know why we're not talking to students about where and how ballet developed. I don't know why we're not talking to students about the different ways that modern dance developed. I don't know why we're not talking about how and where tap developed and evolved. Like, it should be across the board that a successful dance program considers itself a dance education program. If you're just
Mhm.
there for overglorified babysitting and really don't care about the negligent teaching and learning foundations that you're giving your students and their families, and
Mhm.
I got you. That's a different podcast, but I think it's okay for folks to name those things. And then if you have faculty who are trained in the thing and can design a good class, absolutely. If you do not have faculty who are not just trained in hip hop dance, but if you have nobody who's able to represent the culture and the history that inform the dance, then I think it's not a success.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think we have to be able to say that in 2023, it's not successful if we're continuing to teach dance absent of its cultural and historical context, because dance is culture.
Mhm.
Culture is not synonymous with race. Culture is not even synonymous with ethnicity and nationality. It's so much more nuanced. So if we're not teaching dance with cultural context, then we are all failing. Nobody
Right.
gets an A on that. So as a studio, ask yourselves, can you make room to make teaching and educating about the cultural information into your classes, if that's what you're at capacity to do, and or in your programs, if that's at capacity what you're to do, then you know
Mhm.
that. And I think there are people who are doing that, and it
Yeah.
probably took them a while to develop it. It probably
Sure.
got uncomfortable. They may have lost some subscribers, may have lost some patrons, some clients, but they
And that's
figured out
okay. Yeah, that's
that's
okay, because
okay.
I
They
bet those people are way closer to where they wanted to be when they started, even
Yes.
having lost people, right?
Right.
This is Beyond the Steps. We have had another fantastic conversation with Aysha Upchurch. We've talked about building curriculums and programs versus offering just independent classes and what that difference is and why it's so important to distinguish between the two. Aysha has given us some fantastic insights. So we encourage you to go back to the beginning of this conversation and watch from the start, and like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We want to push these messages out, this information out that we're giving you every week. We have some phenomenal guest experts that are here to share their insight and positivity. So we want you to benefit from that. So share this with your community. Melissa, we have to go to homework.
Yes, it's homework time. If you are an avid watcher of Beyond the Steps, then you know. If you're a first timer, here we go. We give homework every single week. Our guest expert is going to give you one thing. Are you ready, Aysha? One thing that you want our viewers to do, between now, because you know we're going to get bite-sized pieces. We don't want to overshoot. One small thing that you can do between now and next Friday, to make progress in this area.
I thought about this, and I'm trying to distill it to one that it may sound huge, but I think it's the most important building block is to go to ask yourself, what are you at capacity to do right now? And the part B of that is, where would you like to be so you can see where the gap is?
Mm-hmm.
What are you at capacity to do right now? Where would you want to be?
Mm-hmm. What can you do right now, and where do you want to be? And
That
answer
sounds simple. That does sound simple, but it's very hard, and it requires that honesty that we talked about earlier.
Right. There's that honesty. So you have your homework. It sounds simple, but I think if you really sit down and do it, you'll realize it's probably not quite as simple as you thought it was going to be.
Let me say this. I'm saying this and to demystify and to like take some of the weight off of the word curriculum. So if you want a garden in your backyard, what are you at capacity to do right now? What would you want your garden to look at? Like, I'm just trying to like ask those essential.
That is a great analogy. I love that.
You know, so like right now, the bedrock in my garden bed is trash. So what I'm at capacity to do right now is remove what's there. I don't know all the things that are but I got to be honest, the more I try to plant something into that soil it's too filled with rocks, I just need to actually take everything out first. And that's what I can do bit by bit. Not all today, because I'll be bent over and not walking, but I can take some out today, some out tomorrow.
And I might not be able to plant that garden until next year.
Right. But I can do this right now. I love that. I love that analogy. We also have homework for you, the same homework that we have every week. Hopefully, many of you have already done this, but if you have not, please take the STEPS initiative. It is a free, yes, I said free course that is available. A number of modules from guest experts around a myriad of topics, including sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, racism and equity, integrative dance, medicine, and science, a number of things. And they are, did I say they were free? Did I mention that they are free? They are totally free. So please go over to the Apollo website. Bree is going to drop that in the on the screen below. Please go and take that. And Aysha, can you tell people how they can find you? Because I'm sure after this, they are going to want to find you ASAP. So how can guests find you?
Yes, guests can find me www.ayshaupchurch.com or on IG, Twitter, mostly IG, at Aysha Dances. I am the only Aysha Upchurch on the planet, so that makes me pretty easy to find.
You've said that before. That is amazing.
I mean, unless Google been lying to me.
Good old Google. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Aysha, for another fabulous chat. It's been so great doing this last guest series with you. We again encourage you all to go and watch it. It's live on Facebook. You can see us on YouTube, just Apollo Performance or TPDC. Or what is it, Melissa? I always
TP
butcher
Dance
this.
Creations.
God, TP Dance
Dance
Creations. Look us up and find seasons 1 through 3 are available. We're bringing Beyond the Steps to you this summer as a podcast, so stay tuned for that. We've been talking about it for a while. We're finally making it happen. And you have your homework from Aysha. So until next week, when we see you right back here, we hope you continue your journey beyond the steps. Everybody have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.